Hey folks, this is Kelani. We're going to be talking about a few different things which have popped up in the news this week, the first of which being the auction house change, which has gone through to hopefully address some of the issues we've been having with the auction house, and then some silly plonkers seem to have gone and get themselves in trouble, exploiting yet another World Quest bug. So let's start with the auction house. Quite a few people might have noticed they've had some issues with the auction house lately. We don't really know why that is. It could be everybody's using the auction house too much, too many players on the affected realms. It does seem to be affecting the high population realms more than anybody else, so that might be a part of it. But the other thing that a lot of people think might be contributing is all of those one stack items. You know, the chaps who clearly just want to annoy everybody else because they're posting their ores or herbs in single stacks. 200 stacks of one to go through before you get to a decent stack. It's always quite frustrating, and it also slows everything down when you're looking at the auction house, when you're scanning, when you're trying to buy. It's just a pain in the rear. So obviously that's one thing that needs to be addressed in one form or another. The dev team seem to think they've got something which might work, although it definitely seems more of a temporary measure as opposed to a permanent solution. So what's the change, which I might add is already in game? Well, it's going to cost you more gold in deposits to post stacks of one. Essentially, your deposit is going to be dependent on how many stacks you're creating as opposed to the actual number of items you're posting. So posting a stack of one cloth is going to cost about the same as posting a stack of 200 cloth, which means that posting 200 stacks of one cloth is going to cost 200 times the amount of posting a stack of 200. So that deposit gold is going to increase the more stacks you create, and obviously if you're creating hundreds of stacks of one, you're going to spend a lot more gold up front for creating those auctions. Now, deposits are actually refunded if an item sells, so with things like BFA materials, that's probably going to sell even if it's in stacks of ones. Most trade goods are hot commodities right now, which means they shouldn't really stay on the auction house unless you're posting them at a ridiculous price, honestly, which means that this might not actually really do anything in the long run, because you're getting the deposit back. Sure, it's more upfront gold, but if you were posting stacks of one for a reason, chances are you're going to still be posting stacks of one. Now, if you look at the deposit and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to cost me so much more gold, hopefully, that's going to actually change something. Personally, I don't think it's going to really work too much as a temporary or permanent solution, and I hope they definitely come up with something else. But this is in game right now, so we can see if this is even working at this point, and it actually seems to be working, which is quite hilarious. I didn't really think this was going to do much, but on my server, on Illidan at least, we just transferred, but on Illidan I saw a lot of people not posting stacks of one anymore. I don't know if that's simply because, their add-ons are telling them it's going to cost a lot more gold. If they weren't using add-ons in the first place, not too sure, but it's definitely seemed to be having some form of effect. We're seeing more stacks of random numbers, 27 and 31, as opposed to just stacks of one. So it turns out the dev team's temporary solution might actually be working, which is fantastic to see. But that doesn't mean it's not a temporary solution. I would definitely like to see a permanent solution for the auction house changes, because the auction house is one of the oldest systems in the game that we have right now. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. If the auction house is running on such old code and it's kind of combining with everything else which has been kind of updated, and I really just think they need to do a huge update at some point. I'm not too sure how that's really going to work because the game is so old at this point, but I would love to see the auction house get a full revamp, because not only is the code probably ancient, but the way that it works is also quite dated as well. We should move towards something of a buy and sell order auction house, or something which just piles all of the orders in one, and when you go to buy something you draw from the whole pile. So if you have 170 ore to contribute to the auction house, someone else has 260 ore, that just gets lumped in, and then you would put a price on what you're willing to let go of yours for, and if someone comes by and is offering more, fantastic, they get yours first. It just seems to be a lot simpler and a lot more efficient for everybody involved, but again, it's going to take probably quite a long time to get that going, because the game at this point is 14 years old, so maybe a bit of a problem. Now, as for whether or not that's going to actually change anything with the speed of the auction house, we'll just have to wait and see. It definitely is very early days right now with this change. It was only posted yesterday, I think, so It's going to take a while, I think, for everybody to realise that 1 stacks might not be the best idea in the world, and when people stop posting their 1 stacks, I think the auction house will speed up significantly. I think the other problem definitely is the amount of people accessing the auction house at the same time though, so it might not fix the entire problem of everything being sluggish. But it hopefully, will get to the point where it starts speeding up a lot earlier rather than having to wait until 1 AM. Now, as for the World Quest exploit, if you aren't in the loop, some players were using an exploit to endlessly farm the same World Quest over and over and over, and as you can imagine, that can get quite lucrative. You can farm reputation as much as you want with any faction that you want, get exalted with everybody in a single day, you can farm the gold ones to just print gold, you can farm the herb ones and the ore ones to just get as many trade skills as you want, gear, turn that into expulsum. It's a pretty big exploit. Now this is pretty big news because players who have been taking advantage of that exploit and getting pretty much whatever they wanted for the last few days, some of the people who were making use of this exploit and just exploiting to their heart's content have apparently started receiving permanent bans. So if you were someone who did this maybe once or twice, you might not get affected, but if you were literally farming to Exalted with all of your reputations in a day, which by the way probably isn't the smartest thing to do in the world if you're trying to not get banned using an exploit, but it seems like this time around exploit early, exploit often is definitely not the case. Now this is kind of interesting because there was a world quest bug at the start of Legion. I think it was a Suramar world quest and it was for artifact power, and basically with that one you could just repeat the world quest. It didn't go off your map. You could complete it and it would stay there, so you could complete it as many times as you wanted. Players were doing that and getting a ridiculous amount of artifact power, way more than they had any real reason to need at that point, and they received temporary bans when this was all said and done. Now the big thing there is that the artifact power wasn't rolled back, so these people got slapped on the wrist with a 3-day ban and they got to keep all of the artifact power they earned through nefarious methods. An exploit is an exploit is an exploit, you're probably going to get banned for using it, but the point here is that they didn't have their rewards stripped, they got to keep their artifact power. So I kind of thought, oh my gosh, it's another world quest bug, they're just going to farm everything they want, everything they need, they'll get banned for maybe 3 to 5 days and then they'll come back and enjoy their spoils of exploits, But no, this time apparently permanent bans, which means that those players won't be making any use of any of that goodness that they got through ill-gotten means. But there is a pretty significant difference here. The world quest bug in Legion was just a world quest not clearing off your map. You weren't doing anything special or particular to make it bug. But the one in BFA, it required you to create a raid group at a certain point in the world quest. This is something that you definitely had to opt into. This wasn't something that happened accidentally. This is something that you knew about the exploit, you knew how to do it, you knew how it worked, and you did it so you could keep farming reputation or gold or trade skills or whatever else you were doing it for. I think these cases are fairly different, even though they both relate to world quests. Back in Legion, if it's just not disappearing off your map, I can kind of see how you might think maybe once or twice that the world quest just didn't complete properly and you can happily do it again and, ooh, some free artifact power. But for this one, you actively had to do it. This is something that people were essentially breaking the game to do, and I definitely think they deserve that permanent ban for it. So I'm really happy with how Blizzard decided to handle this, because exploit early, exploit often should never be the go-to for any player. Exploiting should definitely be something to be worried about and something which has some form of punishment. If you get to keep the rewards in a 3-day ban, that's not really a punishment at all, so I'm glad to see how this turned out. I kind of wonder how much damage they would have been able to do in the few days that they had access to the exploit though, because if you think about it, any rewards that came from world quests, they would have had unlimited access to. All they had to do was repeat the world quest, which includes gold, that includes trade skills, and it also includes expulsum, because most likely they were doing gear, especially trinkets, and scrapping them for expulsum, which means they could have had a pretty strong impact on the crafting market as well. That's honestly probably why they were hit with the bugs so hard this time around, because they were affecting more than just their own character progression. And they were banned just before raids and Mythic Plus starts, so part of me does feel a little sorry for them, but most of me really just doesn't. If you don't exploit, you probably won't get banned. So that's the two pieces of news that I wanted to touch on in this video. What do you think about the auction house changes? Do you think it's going to actually affect anything in the long run? Have you seen any improvements on your auction house on your server? And then what do you think about the exploiters? They seem to have been dealt with quite nicely. Do you think they deserve that permanent ban? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.